Welcome back to the Katcha Outdoors podcast. We got a fun one today. It is the lead versus non-lead discussion. We're going to get into it with Mr. Micah Dungee from Hunting with Nonlead. So thanks for making the drive. Thanks for joining us here in the studio. So if you don't mind, just kind of give us some background on who you are, what you do, your organization, how you got into this. Yeah, let's start there.
Yeah, my name is Micah Dungee. Right now I work for the Institute for Wildlife Studies, running their Hunting with Non-Lead program. Our goal there is to educate sportsmen and ranchers on the use of non-lead ammunition and how the lead ammunition could be affecting other wildlife when it's being used in fragmenting and that kind of stuff. Getting into this, I grew up hunting and fishing. That kind of fueled my passion for wildlife and conservation. So going forward from that, I figured out I wanted to be in the field in some way. So I went off to Oregon State University to get a degree in fisheries and wildlife science. Right after graduating, I worked for ODFW a little bit in their hatchery program. And then I took this job or applied for this job and ended up getting it because it really allows me to marry the passions of my hunting side as well as my conservation side together. Get to talk a lot of hunting, test a lot of different things, look at a lot of different issues, be involved in a lot of different things. So it's pretty great that way.
That's awesome. So what do you do the most? So in your line of work, what do you do the most? Are you at events? Are you talking to people one-on-one? What do you do the most?
A lot of it's different events. So obviously we'll go to like the different expos and stuff like the Sacramento Sportsman Show. And then we were in Bakersfield this year and Redding. And then hitting a lot of the like conservation groups like Cal Deer, Cal Waterfowl, Ducks Unlimited, a lot of their banquets and stuff, setting up with like a little bit same style setup as the expo, a little smaller though, some ballistic gels, some epoxies, just with different examples of lead and non-lead bullets, showing some of those wound channels in ballistic gel and really allowing people to see all that stuff so they can directly compare them side by side, and then trying to help people if they are having issues with that switch over to copper, trying to answer those questions the best of our ability, or if they have questions about availability of bullets, trying to answer that and help people as much as we can.
How much of your work is research?
I would say it's the events are the biggest part, but it's probably a good 25% is researching different stuff coming to market, trying to make sure I'm up on all the literature of lead poisoning and all the new studies coming out about that. And really, and also trying to figure out what issues are pretty common right now with the copper bullets that people are having. So trying to dive into like the social media and the forums and that kind of stuff, trying to find where people are talking about it and potentially what issues they're having.
Okay. So with the research, are you pulling from other pools of research, or is your organization out in the field doing more research like ballistics and, you talked about the gels and stuff like that? You guys do that, or you pull from other sources?
Yeah, so with the gels and stuff, we do a lot of the ballistics there. We do it for ourselves, shooting gels, testing bullets. Our group is part of the founding members of North American Non-Lead Partnership. So under all that, we all have really access to all of each other's information. So when it comes to like testing certain bullets, we can kind of like, not everyone has to do it individually. But when it comes to gels, we really try to have a gel sample for all the major manufacturers and all their common bullets, especially like all their copper ones, because there isn't as many on the market as there is with the lead ones, and then having like an equal number of lead ones that kind of span the realm of cup and core, bonded, like partitions, that kind of stuff. And then we'll also take bullets and we'll shoot them into big drums with water jugs in there. And then like with lead ones, we can go in and collect the fragments and make an epoxy shows like that bullet before. So there's a whole bullet that we pulled out of the casing and that bullet after, and we weigh them to make sure it's like all the pieces that we got. So you can really tell like all those lead bullets are fragmenting just to varying degrees, and this allows us to show it really well.
Okay, that's awesome. This is a government organization, right?
Nonprofit.
It's a nonprofit,
yeah,
affiliated with government work.
Yeah. So
okay.
we.
Where's your funding come from?
We're funded from a grant through National Fish and Wildlife something. It's not US FWS, but we do work with them.
Okay.
So we're funded through a grant.
Okay. I'm excited to get into the nuts and bolts of this. So the first question I have is, what is the number one counter argument that you come up against when you're talking to people that are anti-copper, anti-non-lead? What's the first thing they say? What's the most common argument?
It's kind of a mix of two, really, and they go hand in hand. Availability and cost are probably the two biggest that we come around.
I'm surprised it's not ballistics or performance.
The ballistics ones really depends on. We get that too. Those are probably the most common three. Ballistic, it really depends on really if people, what the experiences they've had. One thing that used to be a lot bigger one, talking to people who have been around it a little longer. And then as people have had more positive experiences or have had more experience using it in general, it's becoming a little less so. On the cost and availability side, a lot of people are like, there's still that misnomer out there that, not necessarily misnomer, but that the cost is way, way higher. And looking at all like the bullets and stuff, we can talk about it whenever you want, or right now even. It's not as much as it used to be. Like the cost of lead bullets and ammunition in general has come up, and the cost of copper has also gone up, but not at like really an equal rate. So like if you compare equal quality bullets like Noslers, like E-tip versus their B-tip, they're like a couple dollars difference. And then especially here in California, because we have to have background checks to do ammo, that really hinders people to get it. And what a lot of people don't realize is that you can order ammo online. You just have to get it shipped to an FFL versus your house.
Okay.
On the ballistic side of it, like you get a lot of people that are complaining necessarily about like they call it penciling through. But what we like, that's where the ballistic gels come in really handy, because you're like even in the ballistic gel, you're getting a really small hole in, really small hole out. What you can't see is all that damage that's occurring on the inside, really. And even when you cut open the ammo, it's hard to tell exactly what happened in there. So that's a really good way to kind of be like, hey, you might have seen the two external holes and think that it penciled through the whole way, but what you can't see is what we're showing in these gels.
All the cavity expansion inside and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So funny thing is, like, I thought the same thing when they first started coming out with non-lead, but then when they made it a law, actually, I think I transitioned to non-lead like the year before they made it law in California. And the performance, I didn't notice any difference.
Yeah.
Like everything I shoot with non-lead dies.
Yep.
So dies just as good as lead animals die.
Yeah.
They all die the same. So I mean, it's if you have a good shot placement, and the cool thing I think about non-lead that is I think a huge advantage, especially with the larger game you're shooting at, is that the retention. Yeah. They're full retention. It's like 90 to 100%, right? Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, so like generally all of them are 95 plus, unless they're designed, like some of the brands design their petals to break off. But your general run-of-the-mill copper bullet, you're looking at 95 and generally 98, 99%.
So let's pull this back for the layman. What is retention?
It's just the bullet staying together in one piece. It's all retaining.
Instead of the fragmenting you were talking about earlier.
So with weight retention, it's basically comparing your bullet weight before you shoot it to the largest chunk of bullet you recover afterwards.
And I think that the major benefit to retention for people that don't know this part of the argument is that when your bullet hits that animal, so mass, right? The more mass you have in that bullet, it's just like if you're shooting a 22 versus a 7 rim mag, there's more mass. Obviously, there's more speed, but the more mass you have in a bullet, the more it's going to penetrate through the animal. So if your bullet goes in and then breaks into a bunch of pieces, you instantly lose mass on any individual given piece, and it's just going to slow down.
Yep.
But then when you're retaining all your mass, the bullet just carries straight through.
Yeah, you got force carrying through, and it, like, let's say like with the lead one, you go in, it'll punch through, and then let's say that like it's a particular bullet and really blows up. You're not going to get any more penetration. It could just stop right there. Versus like that copper one, it's going to punch through, do damage the whole way, and then usually either like end up under the other hide or oftentimes penetrate all the way through. So then you're getting 2 holes on there versus 1. So that's part of the thing. Like they perform differently. Like I'll never tell somebody that lead doesn't kill. It's killed for a long time. It's more of they kill differently with instead of blowing up and fragmenting and doing damage that way, they penetrate all the way through and touch more tissue.
So let's talk about the risks of lead, and then we'll circle back around to some of the data that, you said you educate hunters, ranchers. Well, ranchers in particular, what's the risk out there?
Yeah, so with lead bullets, as we talked about a little bit, they fragment really bad. So like you'll get anywhere from 50% to 25% of that original bullet just fragments into pieces that are really then spread throughout the wound channel as well as throughout the body cavity, such as the guts and that kind of stuff. And obviously none of it, even when we're hunting, we definitely don't take the guts out. And then for like ranchers doing deprivation and stuff, oftentimes they're not dealing with that animal at all. It was a nuisance, so they're like, all right, I'm done with it. I can leave it there. Something will eat on it. So that really the issue is you have all those fragments in there, and then you have avian scavengers such as bald eagles, golden eagles, and the one people are most well known for is the California condor, and they're eating on those, and then over time they can build up lead in their system, and it can affect their reproductive ability or any life factors such as their central nervous system and stuff, and or just outright kill them. So eliminating that lead via those pathways such as the gut piles and carcasses is how you can eliminate that risk for those.
Have you done any research into the prevalence of that specific problem, like the avian consumption of lead?
Yeah, so with the condor, they're obviously an endangered species, so they're really well studied. We refer to them kind of as the canary in the coal mine because it's where the issue was first noticed with like centerfire bullets. So back in like around 1990, they were down to about 22 birds. A program was implemented to recover them. With that, as birds started being released in the wild, they all had GPS trackers. They were constantly having their blood tested and just constantly being checked up on. So that's when they started to realize that there was lead in the blood samples there. And they, through a bunch of different ideas and time, they figured out that the timing of it was generally around that late fall during hunting season to post-hunting season. Especially down, a lot of the studies were down on the Kaibab Plateau. So then they figured out, they're like, well, where's this coming from? Like, and at that time, a lot of the biologists on that project happened to be hunters, including Chris Parrish, who's from Bakersfield and then went down to Arizona for school and ended up now is the CEO of the Peregrine Fund. He was one of the original authors in a lot of those papers. They were like, well, we're hunters, so like, let's try this out for ourselves. So let's go shoot some, see how much these bullets, what really is happening, see if this is a potential pathway. And then they shot those animals, and they're like, well, let's make this as realistic as possible, gut the animal, do everything like we would normally if we were harvesting it. Then so x-rays got involved, and they're like, we know that it's not really in this meat we're taking, like there's potential for it to be there, but we're removing that from the field. So like, how is it still there? And then one of them was like, but we have a gut pile here, so like, let's check it. So like, x-ray got involved, you scan that gut pile, find all those fragments in there. So the combo of knowing those fragments are in that gut pile and then the timing of the blood samples and with the elevated lead and everything, kind of the two of those combined.
So it was initiated, this whole movement was initiated by hunters?
Yeah, so it was based on the biologist working on the California condors, a lot of it, and then those studies were replicated in eagles and stuff. Mm-hmm. But the biologists at the time and now still were people who grew up hunting and to continue to hunt.
I like that because I think there's a perception that this is a kind of an anti-hunting movement, right?
Yeah.
The non-lead, but that's not the case. It sounds like it's more of a conservation movement.
Yeah, it's people who grew up hunting and got into the conservation world and then started doing these studies. And Chris really, when it started coming into being an issue that was brought before the commission here in California, he went before the commission, spoke to the commission, was like, hey, I did these studies. Yes, the lead is an issue. The science is not being used in the way we intended it to. And that's one thing that around this issue we've really learned over time is that once you put something out there, people can use it however they want. So you kind of got to be careful about not necessarily what you put out there, but how you put it out there and how you phrase certain things. Like they just put their studies out there and figured, like people will see this and want to do something on their own versus the anti-hunting or animal rights groups, anti-hunting, whatever we want to call them or they want to call themselves, got a hold of it and tried to use it as a way to take away hunting or limit hunting. And that's kind of where that perspective comes around.
Got it. That makes sense. Yeah. Well, I want to get into the performance and the data. I think that's what most people will be interested in. Again, I'm not the pro on this. Ben knows a lot more than I do, but my experience is anecdotal. So I remember the first buck I killed with copper. I actually recovered. I still have the bullet. Mm-hmm. And like you said, the retention was there. The whole thing was there.
Yep.
So I remember I shot it at maybe 120 yards downhill. I got to the buck, excuse me. And then when we opened it up to gut it, it was like it had turned the lungs to cottage cheese.
Yeah.
It entered and he dropped.
Like strawberry
Boom.
cottage cheese.
Yeah. Yeah. And that I was blown away by that. And no pun intended. But yeah, opening that thing up and seeing the damage that it did, I was like, this works.
Yeah.
So let's get into the data. Let's get into the performance. So go through some of the performance comparisons between lead and non-lead copper.
Yeah, so they kill differently. The biggest difference is you have copper, which is a really hard metal, versus lead, which is really soft metal. So you're shooting a chunk of metal at a super high velocity. That copper bullet, when it hits, it's like I said, a harder metal. So it doesn't break up as much. So like it has enough velocity. Generally, depending on what ranges and that kind of stuff, and we can get into that too. You're shooting because they do require a little bit more velocity. To expand, give you that nice mushroom shape, or like I said, with some bullets, break those petals off if that's what the manufacturer intended. Versus lead, it's a softer metal, so when it's being shot at those same velocities, it hits, the nose opens up, and then that lead fragments into little pieces. So they kill different ways. That copper bullet, like we said, is going to penetrate more, so it's going to go more through an animal. Versus and give you like the permanent wound channels, pretty similar. And what really is, and then you have that temporary wound channel where it expands, so that bullet goes through and then comes back down. So that permanent wound channel, super similar, like width and everything. You're not going to get much more between lead or copper, about like double, 3 times the diameter of the bullet, depending on how much it really tears that tissue. And it's going to penetrate through. Versus that lead bullet, it still might penetrate all the way through it, potentially depending on the bullet individually. But you're seeing those fragments in there that break off. They could do a little bit damage. They're also so small that they could really not do a lot of damage. So it really breaks down to that metal difference and how it behaves at high velocities.
So ultimately copper's lighter than lead, right?
Yep.
Or brass or any kind of alloy thereof. So that's one of the issues that a lot of people complain about, is that it doesn't have the same energy at a given range, say 500 yards. You may be running out of energy with a monolithic or copper bullet or whatever, and where a lead bullet can still retain more energy, which is true. But also, that you can always boil an argument down to like shot placement, right?
Yeah.
So the copper bullet may have a little bit less energy at that range, but the penetration will probably still be better than a lead bullet, because it's going to retain the entire, bullet. So it's kind of, a lot of talking in circles about, the same kind of thing, but it is something to be mindful of. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think manufacturers load copper bullets a little hotter usually, or basically you just have to watch you look at the energy readout, right? Foot-pound energy at whatever ranges manufacturers have them, the specs on their website or whatever.
Velocity is probably the better way to like look at it for that perspective.
Okay.
When it comes to getting the optimal expansion, most manufacturers recommend 1,800 to 2,000. I personally try to stay at that 2,000 side. And that is what most manufacturers recommend for their monolithic bullets.
As a minimum, or
as a minimum to get you that expansion. Some go down to about 1,800. So where you hit that really obviously depends on the cartridge you're shooting and bullet and powder and that kind of stuff. But most of the times you're not hitting that till 400 or 500 yards anyways. And I think I just got a 6.5 PRC, and I haven't done too much data collection with it yet, but it's projected to be like 550, 600 which is beyond what most people should be shooting anyways.
Right.
So that's where the range, so you get a reduction in your velocity. That's where your kind of the axis meets.
Yeah,
between
where your
velocity and range.
Yeah, where your velocity is low enough that you could see or potentially likely to see expansion issues, where you could see where people talk about having no expansion or something like that. That's kind of that point where you could see that.
So to get longer ranges, say you want to shoot, at the range 700-800 yards, you would just need, what would you need to do?
It really, at the range,
doesn't matter.
Shoot it as far as you want. So that's the expansion really only matters when you're shooting at an animal.
Okay.
So there is manufacturers out there like McGuire Ballistics down in Southern California. They're shooting pigs at a lot longer range. They have a guide service and stuff too. They're shooting pigs with their copper rose bullet at, I can't recall an exact range, but farther ranges than I just said for the Barnes LRX. So it really, the individual manufacturers, they can recommend something else, or some of those bullets that have the petals break off. You could see better expansions at lower velocities with them just because of the way that metal is designed to work.
Also, I mean, moral of the story is get a bullet going faster, right?
Yep.
So if you're working with Magnum cartridges, you're going to have an extended range
Yep.
over something that's just a standard cartridge. So, like, I shoot a 7-rem mag most of the time, and I'm considering picking up or building a 6.5 Creedmoor. I know, it's like the man bun of rifle cartridges.
They get it done, though.
Mostly for like 500 and in. And a lot of, really, I want my wife and kids to be able to shoot a rifle that's more manageable on recoil.
Oh, yeah.
I've got several other rifles, but I want something that's kind of like, calm down, put a nice break on it, the whole thing. But as far as like a 7-rem mag, or he shoots a 300 Winchester mag, I mean, you're getting pretty good velocities and weight out there quite a ways.
Yeah,
so.
it can really depend, like, obviously, like we said, on cartridge. So if you have a bigger like a Magnum or something, like he said, that is shooting faster to begin with, or like retains its velocity a little better because it is a bigger bullet, that range extends. So, like, I mean, versus like a 243, or like my experience has been like a 270, like the Barnes is like you hit 2,000 around like 400, low 400 yards.
So again, I'm coming from like the layman's perspective. So if I want to be an ethical hunter, it sounds like my responsibility is to go look at take stock of what I'm shooting.
Yep.
So, and then when I buy my bullets, I'm going to take a look at that chart that they provide, the velocity chart.
Yep.
And I'm going to look at where I hit that 2,000 feet per second.
Yep. I mean, that's the best way to do it. If you want to shoot a little longer ranges, look at some of those bullets and use that to help you compare your options. Obviously, then you get into whether or not your rifle likes that individual bullet. But that's probably the main thing. One of the main harder things with switching to copper is it's just another little thing you potentially do have to worry about. So being cognizant of that will definitely help you in your performance you see.
Have you seen stats in California, what people shoot the most for hunting?
I haven't seen like hard stats, but talking to people, Barnes is definitely the most popular, which makes sense considering they load them. Federal loads them. Other people load them. The TTSX probably the most popular.
That's what I shoot.
Yeah, LRX is up there. Other than that, Hornady's probably the second most popular.
That's what I shoot.
Formerly they're GMX, now they're CX. So those are probably the two most popular. And then you get into some people who really love Nosler, or you really get into people that reload, and even Barnes is probably the most popular there. But then you get into the hundreds of small companies.
Oh yeah, there's all
bullets.
kinds of options out there when you start reloading.
Yeah, it's crazy.
What about calibers?
It's all over the board.
Is it?
And you get a lot of people that, obviously the trend in the entire hunting world has been for a long time, big calibers, big bullets going really fast. So you still see a lot of that, people shooting really, really big calibers.
So based on your research with copper, let's say somebody's going to be rifle hunting elk, so a bigger animal. What would be, in your recommendation, like the minimum caliber to use?
If you're using copper, you said
With copper, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the guys that he actually used to have this job. I still talk to him and stuff. He took an elk last year with 6.5 Creedmoor shooting the Hornady CX. You get in, the biggest thing's bullet placement. Like, you put the bullet where it's supposed to go and it's going to work. With a 6.5 Creedmoor, I might not want to hunt an elk, but that really comes down to my personal preference. With my 6.5 PRC, just that little bit more velocity, I would feel fine doing it. I have a 270. I would have no problem shooting an elk with that. Really, it comes down to bullet placement on choosing a cartridge, or what you feel that you can shoot accurately.
People don't spend enough time, like, I don't know what the percentage would be. I'd be very interested to find out of people that get their hunting rifle and maybe check zero or maybe don't. And that's the extent of how much they practice with the rifle before hunting season.
Yep.
And it's like, you can basically just throw the whole ammunition argument out the window at that point.
Yeah.
Because you might as well be shooting rocks at them. Like, if you're not practicing even a little bit, like a few 2 or 3 shooting sessions before season starts. I know everyone's got a life and people are busy and all that stuff, but just shoot your rifle a couple times, put a few groups of ammo through in a couple different range sessions, and make sure you're dialed. Shoot at some ranges you're going to shoot at. Like, what's my max everyone has this idea of what their max range is. I mean, I've killed deer 550.
Yeah.
But that's not for everybody. I'm not saying that everyone should do that. Most people shouldn't. But I've shot a lot at that range. 500, 600, 700 yards. So I knew what my bullet was doing. I knew what my rifle was doing. So that I think that boils down, like, more importantly than the whole rest of the argument of what bullets this and the performance and all that. If you're not putting it in the right spot, then forget it.
Yeah.
Figure all that out first.
Yeah.
And then you can critique the bullet,
Yeah. Shoot accurately first, and then if you have an issue with it, then try to figure that out from there.
What other states besides California have the non-lead rule?
So California is the only one that has a statewide ban on the use of lead ammunition for the take of wildlife. Other states have, or federal refuges have, not necessarily bans, but I guess bans on certain species or in certain areas that they have deemed like extra sensitive to lead. And obviously with waterfowl, it's been that for 30 years. Yeah. So from outside of waterfowl, California is the only state that has a statewide ban. Other states have looked at doing that or looked at doing it in extra sensitive areas. Some have done it in extra sensitive areas. So
I thought I heard Arizona was looking at something.
So Arizona and Utah, they have voluntary programs. Arizona specifically on the Kaibab Plateau, and then Utah in that southern Utah area where the states connect. They have voluntary programs which incentivizes the use of lead-free ammo due to the condor populations being down there. So that's the route they went versus California went the full ban. Then that program's been around for 10, 15 years at this point, and they see 90% participation in that, whether that be using lead-free ammo or burying/removing the gut pile from the landscape.
So, if I remember right, it seems like last year or sometime I saw maybe Randy Newberg or someone jumping on the bandwagon. He had some non-lead people out.
Yeah,
and they were having some discussions about it.
Yeah, it was North American Non-Lead Partnership, Institute for Wildlife Studies, who I work for in our programs under them, was part of the founding group with Peregrine Fund and Oregon Zoo of that North American Non-Lead Partnership. And he had Leland Brown, who essentially runs the Non-Lead Partnership, and Chris Parrish, who is CEO of Peregrine Fund. And they're two that have been around it really since the beginning, from even the Ridley tree times here in California. So that's who he had on.
So it's interesting to see that which I think is great that Newberg and I think there's been some others even that are starting to kind of like adopt it ahead of, state regulations where they're at. There's not even a law, and a lot of people are starting to switch over to non-lead.
And that's the goal. Even like with our program here in California, before the law was put in place, and even now with the North American Non-Lead Partnership, their goal would be to provide people as much information as possible and see that voluntary switch based on our conservation heritage and being like, hey, as hunters, we pride ourselves on being conservationist. We have learned that there is an issue, and we have learned that there's a way to solve that issue. So we solved it on our own. And then that's just another feather in our cap, like I said, of that conservation heritage. So, and even our goal here before the law was passed was to see some sort of voluntary program versus the legislative. And if we can use that voluntary program like the Arizona one, whether it's incentivized or not, in the other states and throughout the country, then that would be a lot better than legislative, because really no one likes to be told you have to do this.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially our group of people.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
hunting community.
Yeah.
And you get away from a lot of those issues, like you said, of people seeing it as an attack on guns. If it's a voluntary or incentive-based program, you can eliminate a lot of the opinion of that.
So I like that perspective, because it starts with education.
Yep.
And that's how you make true social change.
Yep.
Is education.
Yep.
So let's say I'm brand new to hunting and I'm in California. I'm going to go pick up a rifle. What do you recommend? Caliber and bullet.
Caliber, if someone's joining, I would not recommend shooting a Magnum. Find something that recoils at a level that you can shoot it accurately. So whether that's a 6.5 Creedmoor, a 270, something like that. I have a 270. I just picked up a 6.5 PRC. I really like to being able to like spot my shots and stuff. So I really like shooting those little bit smaller calibers compared to a lot of them, but something that I can shoot as accurate as possible, because accuracy, as we said, is the biggest thing. Like if you put, no matter what the bullet's made out of, you put it in the right spot, you're going to see the best performance.
It's just like a bow.
Yeah.
You know, it's like if you want to be a tough guy and draw a weight that's a little too big for you, then, you know, you're going to struggle with accuracy and repetitiveness and all that kind of stuff, and repeatability. So, you know, get something that's comfortable. I mean, honestly, there's a lot of people that hate on the 6.5 Creedmoor just because it became super popular really quick and everything. But I mean, you really can't get like a much easier round to work with. They're super accurate, the low recoil. They've got enough energy to do what needs to be done.
Especially here in California, like our deer, like especially Western California, are a lot smaller.
Tiny.
You don't need a big caliber or even really a big bullet. Like especially with that high rate retention, you don't need a big bullet. You can shoot a lot lighter bullet and still get great performance. On the bullet side, like as a recommendation, I would buy a few different ones, and whichever one my rifle likes the best, that's what I'm going to shoot.
When you say your rifle likes the best, what does that mean?
Most accurately. Whatever bullet.
Group's the tightest.
Yeah, whatever bullet you get a group that you are satisfactory with, because that varies for everyone. Like, I want a really tight group versus somebody else could be like, oh, it's a 3-inch group at 100 yards. That's fine for me. So whatever one you get accurate or satisfactory accuracy with, that's the one I'd shoot.
Okay.
Which makes it a little hard because you have to try a few. Potentially, or you could figure out the first one you like, and that's the one that works.
Well, it goes back to the practice part of it.
Yep.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny is my my 7 rim mag, the first non-lead ammo I bought was the factory loaded Barnes TTSX, and I think 150 grains.
Yeah.
And that stupid rifle shoots like a half MOA with those bullets, no problem.
Yeah.
And it's just like an out of the box rifle. It's savage. And older, and then one of my buddies and I was out shooting. He has a most of the way custom gun at that point, custom trigger in it, hand loads, and he couldn't even get inside an MOA.
Yeah,
and he was so frustrated by it. But it's like, you know, some ammo and some rifles, they just like don't get along, and then some it's just like that's the one. Like don't even mess with anything else. Like if I really think for most hunters, if you can get inside that 1 MOA, or somewhere close to 1 MOA, for just your average hunter that's going to shoot 300 and in, you got a good bullet for your rifle. Just go for it, you know.
Yeah, like you said, like Barnes is the first one you grab. If someone asks me from like what bullet should I grab first, I say Barnes. Not saying it's going to work in everyone's rifle, but if you were just grabbing one off the shelf as your first option, it's probably what I would pick. They've been doing it the longest. Their bullets are in the most offerings generally, so.
Let's talk a little bit about the law. So obviously the law for a hunting weapon is non-lead requirement for game animals. What if you're packing a sidearm for protection?
So the law is actually if you're shooting at any animal, so the take of any wildlife, it's use of non-lead. So, and that's where a huge confusion comes in with people, is they associate the law just with hunting. So they think for like deprivation and stuff, like we talked about with ranchers earlier, that it doesn't affect them. Whereas it's the take of any wildlife. So with that sidearm, if you ended up taking, like, let's say you used it to shoot a bear or something when that's legal, or you shot whatever, then you're supposed to have non-lead in there.
Okay.
I wouldn't be super overly worried about it myself.
Yeah.
If I had my main carry gun for like self-protection while I was hiking or hunting or something, and a cat tries to jump on me and I shoot it with non-lead.
Yeah.
Or, you know, or I should shoot it with lead ammo, I'm not going to be too worried about it.
And that's one of those things where like
they can find me if they need to. I'm like, whatever.
They're not going to go out of their way to be like, oh, you were carrying it as protection on you and you had lead ammo. Like technically by the letter of the law, yes, you're supposed to have non-lead in there, but you weren't intending to take an animal with it. So I wouldn't see a game warden writing you a ticket for that unless they knew you were purposely.
Unless he's having a real bad day.
Yeah.
Or unless it's the only weapon you're carrying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like I said, that's one of the biggest confusion points with the law is people think it's just hunting based when in reality it's the take of any wildlife.
So
that's
even
good to know.
shooting ground squirrels
Yep.
and anything like that.
Shooting ground squirrels, shooting varmint, shooting anything like that, you're supposed to be using non-lead.
So basically, throw your lead in the trash.
Yeah,
Well,
and
unless it's for a target gun.
shoot
I'm
at the
just kidding.
range, and that's where we talk about people, like if they have a complaint about cost and they're like, oh, it's expensive to shoot a bunch at the range with it. Like you can still shoot that lead ammo like as range practice. Granted, it's probably not going to shoot the exact same as your copper ammo, but you can switch. And then so like let's say you take a lot of practice shots at the range, like that's what you want to use to get comfortable with your rifle is that lead ammo. Shooting at range, just getting used to shooting at range, just becoming a better shot. Right before the hunting season, switch over to your box of copper. Generally, your rifle's gonna be pretty close. It's not gonna be that far off. So, sight it in just fully, and then you should be good to go.
What differences would you see between the lead and the copper? So I shoot a 180 grain bullet for my 300 Win Mag. If I shot exclusively lead leading up to season, I switched to copper, like you said. What kind of performance variation would I see?
When it comes to accuracy, it really depends on how your rifle shoots that individual bullet. The biggest thing would be if you're shooting 180 grain lead, don't go buy 180 grain copper because those metals are two different weights. So if you have 180 grain lead and 180 grain copper, that copper bullet's going to be quite a bit longer, and then it's not going to stabilize in the same way in your rifling. So you want to drop that grain weight down 10-20% so you can match up those lengths and get your best stabilization in there, which then gives you the best accuracy.
So if I'm shooting 180 grain lead, I would want to shoot like 160 grain copper.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have the most experience because I've been shooting a 270 the longest. So like a lot of the lead offerings out there are right around that like 150 versus your copper, like the heaviest one you're gonna find is like 130. So 20, like it's like what 27% or like 23% or something like that difference.
I mean, the caveat would be if you have a rifle made with a high twist barrel,
And
then
yes.
and that's the cool thing about the 6.5 too.
Yep.
Is you generally have a little bit higher twist rate, especially if you're kind of building it out. You can put whatever you want in there, and if you know you're going to be shooting non-lead, if it's your main deer rifle, you can put a higher twist rate in that barrel, and you're good for heavier rounds with non-lead.
Yeah,
so
it'll offset that performance gap.
Yeah, so the issue with that length is it might not spin fast enough to stabilize, but like you said, if you have a faster twist rate in there, then you can spin it faster and it'll stabilize for a longer bullet. So it's really about like matching up like the lengths of bullets versus the grain weight to get that best performance.
Okay. Would you see those performance variations at a shorter distance, let's say 100 to 200 yards, or would you need to get out, 400 yards to start to see it?
You could. It really depends. It really depends on how much that stabilization is off. So like if it's almost stabilized but not quite stabilized, it might only be like a small difference at 100 yards. But if you go 200, 300, 400, then you could see it more. So it really depends on how much off of stabilization you are.
Okay. Well, I wanted to talk about what you're going to be doing. Coming up. What's your future plans with the organization? Any events coming up, and kind of like your vision for the future as an organization.
Yeah, our goal, like I said, is education. So providing as much information to people about the use of non-lead as well as the potential effects of lead, both on wildlife or even potentially in people's meat. That's less talked about and hasn't really been studied as much because we don't want to feed people lead.
Yeah, I was wondering that a minute ago, if there's fragments that disperse into the edible parts.
So there's a few studies that have come out around that. Like in North Dakota, they looked at like ground meat that was like donated and stuff, and they found some lead in there. But it's a lot harder to study that just because, and especially the effects, because you don't want to force somebody to eat lead just for science. And no, it's not really.
Let's check their toxicity.
Yeah,
he needs more meat. He needs more of that lead meat.
So really, our biggest thing is education, whether that's through like social media, Facebook, and then Instagram's probably where I'm the most active on, trying to provide people information, whether that be about like summarizing scientific studies so that people have them, providing links for that, or just providing, trying to repost stuff about the different options that are on the market. And then, like I said earlier, we go to a lot of the expos and have 10 different ballistic gels of 10 different bullets out there, and then the epoxies of 25 different bullets. and then go into a lot of like banquet dinners and stuff. On top of that, we do like shooting demos, so we'll have a barrel set up. We'll shoot one with a non-lead bullet, one with a lead bullet, so people can see us shoot those bullets and then see the amount of fragments that are in them by themselves, so that nobody's like, oh, there's black magic of you getting a bunch of fragments somewhere and putting them in there. Lately, we've been doing a couple of those with like the CDFW Advanced Hunter Clinics. So that's where we've done 2 of those this year. But if anybody gets a group together and wants us to come out and do them, more than happy to come out and do a shooting demo.
Okay, that's cool. So are you a resource for hunters then?
Yeah, that's the goal.
Okay.
That's the goal, to be a resource for hunters and anyone interested in it for as much information, like I said, about lead and non-lead ammo as possible.
So if someone wanted guidance on all this stuff, they could go to your website or call or whatever?
Yeah, huntingwithnonlead.org is a good website for it, or Hunting with Nonlead's our Instagram as well. Mm-hmm. Or even you can Facebook too, Hunting with Nonlead, same thing there. DM us. If you go to our website, there's emails and phone numbers on there. Call any of us and we'll answer.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a needed resource, especially here in California.
Yeah.
Do you see this movement kind of sweeping across the West more?
I think the use of non-lead bullets has definitely gotten a lot more popular, whether that be because people like the weight retention and performance, or because they like the fact that they're not having lead in their meat or leaving on the ecosystem. That's up to the individual. Mm-hmm. But if they choose one, they still get the benefit of the other.
Okay.
And like with the non-lead partnership, another we're working on with all the groups there is we're trying to make a comprehensive resource where all the options, whether that be factory loaded, reloading components, shotgun slugs, pistol stuff, where all like the non-lead bullet options that we can find are all in one place so that people could access it. They could search by grain weight, they could search by caliber, they could search by manufacturer, and then they could use that and be like, it's not necessarily going to say whether it's available for purchase at that exact time, but here's the options with those parameters.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
Because we see a lot of people, like, they don't know what's on the market. They only go to their local store, and that's all they see, and they're like, there's nothing available, versus you go on the internet, and between all the stores, there's everything.
And it might offset some of those price concerns, too. Like, I've been to some local shops and picked up my ammo, and I might spend $100 for a box of 20.
Yeah.
Whereas I've bought it online for a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
So, okay. And that's like a document on your website that shows all that?
It's not on there yet. It's something we're still developing on and working on and trying to figure out how we're going to present it and give it out to people, whether that's like obviously through a website and that kind of stuff.
Doesn't the state have one of those?
So the state has something similar. They have a, should I say, very outdated list of
makes sense.
Of manufacturers.
Where to buy your cannonballs.
Yeah. Of manufacturers that have gotten their bullets approved through them. But it's listed by manufacturer, so you can't search by caliber or cartridge or grain weight or anything like that. It's just the names of all the manufacturers, and you can like click on a PDF and they have what they produce on there. So even like when you get to, like I said, with Barnes, like Barnes loads their own bullets, but other manufacturers do too. So you could have to go through each individual brand to see what they offer with that Barnes bullet.
Okay.
So it is there. It's just very cumbersome.
Another question I just thought of, it's kind of off the subject, but what do game wardens check for with non-lead? What are they looking for?
That is one that is very difficult because without cutting a bullet open, if it's a tipped bullet, you can't really tell. If it's an untipped bullet and you can see that lead, obviously you know it's lead. Or if people really want to circumvent the law, they'll have a tipped bullet and they'll have a non-lead box with lead core bullets in it. So talking to some wardens, if it's something they think that someone is breaking that law, they'll take a bullet and they cut it in half and send it in to get it tested, or just send it in to get tested and then the lab cuts it in half. And that's at this time really the only way to tell. There's no pocket like thing you can scan over and it'll tell you, unfortunately, because even to those lead ones, you still have a copper jacket around that lead bullet or lead core. So it's a pretty hard thing to like test in the field.
I was wondering about that because they have those what is it, like the plastic looking tips? What are they called? Yeah,
you get just like a ballistic tip.
Polymer, yeah, and they look the same.
Yep.
Yeah.
Every manufacturer has a little bit different color. Some manufacturers have a different color, lead versus non-lead, but you can't really rely on that to write somebody a ticket.
A friend of ours getting busted shooting lead. He was home loading. This was many years ago, duck hunting.
Oh, okay.
And he was home loading lead mixed with like bismuth or something. And so somehow a game warden got onto him somehow. I'm not sure what all transpired, but the guy ended up cutting his shotgun shells open and taking pellets out and whacking them with a hammer on his hitch ball.
Yeah. So with shotguns, it's a lot easier to do because they're a lot easier to cut open. They're just like a plastic shell around a bunch of pellets.
Just smush it, and if it smushes,
it's
lead.
Yeah. And a lot with shotguns, it's so common now that if someone has lead, generally like the bullet will say or their box will say or whatever. But it's definitely a lot when it comes like centerfire stuff and even like rimfire stuff, a lot harder to enforce than the waterfowl world.
Interesting. Well, I think we covered it all, huh? That's informative.
At least for now.
Yeah, I learned a lot. So appreciate you coming by. Yeah, we'll have to continue the conversation. But one more time, what's your website? How do people get in touch?
Hunting with Nonlead is our website as well as our Instagram and Facebook. The other group I mentioned is North American Nonlead Partnership. That's their website as well as their Instagram too. A lot of great information between those two websites. We really try to work together as much as possible. Through that Hunting with Nonlead Instagram, if someone wants to DM me, whether it's questions they have, if they want to see more of the studies and that kind of stuff, more than happy to send it to them.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. We will see you on the next episode.